The overhead lights of Mercer's bistro cast long shadows across the polished hardwood floor as the last customers of the evening meal filtered out into the cold December night. Through the tall windows, the glow of downtown Philadelphia's skyline painted streaks of amber and white against the darkening sky. Inside, the air still carried the mingled scents of roasted garlic, seared steak, and the faint bitterness of espresso. Diane Carter moved between the tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Her dark hands, calloused but steady, collected empty wine glasses and stacked plates with barely a sound. She was 43 years old, though the lines around her eyes made her look older, not from age but from years of keeping her head down and her opinions to herself. She wore the standard uniform, black slacks, a crisp white button-down shirt, and a black apron tied at her waist. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, not a strand out of place. Professional, invisible, exactly how management preferred. The dinner rush had been brutal tonight. A corporate holiday party had taken over the back room, and the kitchen had been slammed for 3 straight hours. Diane's feet ached, her lower back throbbed, and she still had 2 more hours before her shift ended. But she didn't complain. She never complained. Across the dining room, near the tall window overlooking Walnut Street, a young man sat alone at table 12. Diane had noticed him earlier, not because he stood out, but because he didn't. He was in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His dark hair was styled with the kind of casual precision that only money could buy. A silver watch gleamed on his wrist, catching the light every time he lifted his fork. He had ordered the filet mignon, cooked rare with a side of truffle mashed potatoes, a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, year unspecified because he clearly didn't care about the price. He ate slowly, methodically, his eyes occasionally drifting to his phone but never lingering long. No calls, no texts, just waiting. Diane had served hundreds of men like him, wealthy, entitled, the kind who treated servers like furniture, functional but forgettable. She had learned long ago not to expect much from people who had everything. The man finished his meal, wiped his mouth with the linen napkin, and stood abruptly. He didn't signal for the check. He simply pulled out a black leather wallet, extracted a credit card, and walked toward the front register where Marcus, the night manager, stood reviewing receipts. Diane watched from the corner of her eye as the transaction took place. Quick, efficient, no small talk. The man signed the receipt without looking at it, pocketed his card, and turned toward the door. He didn't glance back at his table, didn't acknowledge anyone. He just left. A moment later, Diane approached table 12 with her gray plastic bin. The check holder sat in the center of the table, the signed receipt visible inside. She opened it, expecting to see the usual tip, 15%, maybe 20% if the customer was feeling generous. Instead, there were coins. 3 quarters, 2 dimes, a nickel, $1. Diane stared at the coins for a long moment, her expression unchanging. The meal had cost $87. The wine alone was $35. And this man, this clearly wealthy man, had left a single dollar. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came whenever she was reminded of her place in the world. But she didn't react. She had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what Diane discovers under that table, consider subscribing to our channel. We're just getting started, and your support helps us bring you more incredible stories like this one. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey. Diane picked up the coins one by one and dropped them into her apron pocket. They clinked softly against each other, a small, humiliating sound that seemed to echo louder than it should have. She began stacking the plates, scraping the leftover food into the bin, wiping down the surface with her cloth. But something felt off. It wasn't the insult of the tip, though that stung. It wasn't even the carelessness of it. It was something else. A feeling. An instinct honed by years of noticing things that others overlooked. The man had sat in that seat for 40 minutes. He had eaten slowly, deliberately. He had been waiting for something. And then he had left in a hurry, as if his purpose had been fulfilled. Diane paused, her hand still gripping the damp cloth. She glanced around the dining room. Marcus was at the register, counting cash. 2 other servers were in the back, prepping for the late-night crowd. No one was watching her. She lowered herself slightly, just enough to see beneath the table. At first she saw nothing, just the polished legs of the chair, the shadows cast by the overhead lights, a few crumbs that had fallen during the meal. But then, There, tucked against the far leg of the table, pressed into the corner where the floor met the wall, was something small, rectangular, dark blue, almost black in the dim light. Diane's breath caught in her throat. It was a USB drive. She froze, her mind racing. Why would someone leave a USB drive under a restaurant table? Accidentally? No, this wasn't accidental. The way it was positioned, deliberately hidden, carefully placed, this was intentional. Her first instinct was to reach for it, but something stopped her. A voice in the back of her mind, the one that had kept her safe all these years, whispered a warning. This is not your business. Walk away. But she couldn't. Not yet. Diane straightened up, her heart pounding. She finished clearing the table, moving on autopilot, her thoughts consumed by what she had just seen. She carried the bin back to the kitchen, dumped the plates into the wash station, and returned to the dining room. Table 12 was empty now, clean, as if nothing had happened. She was about to head to the next table when Marcus called her name. "Diane, come here a second." She turned, her stomach tightening. Marcus stood near the front entrance, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Next to him stood the young man from table 12. He had come back. The man's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time that evening, he looked directly at her, really looked at her. His gaze was intense, searching, as if he were trying to read something in her face. "Did you finish cleaning table 12? Marcus asked, his tone neutral but firm. Diane nodded slowly. "Yes." The man stepped forward, his hands in his pockets. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured. "Did you happen to look under the table?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Diane's pulse quickened. Her mind raced through possible responses. Lie. Tell the truth. What did this man want? "Why?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. The man tilted his head slightly, a ghost of a smile crossing his lips. "Because," he said quietly, "I didn't think anyone would." The silence that followed was suffocating. Diane could feel Marcus's eyes on her, waiting for an answer. The young man stood perfectly still, his hands still in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Through the tall windows behind them, the Philadelphia night had grown darker, the streetlights casting pools of yellow across the empty sidewalk. "I cleaned the table," Diane said carefully, choosing her words like someone navigating a minefield. "I picked up the dishes. I wiped it down." "That's not what I asked," the man said, his voice still calm but with an edge now, something sharper beneath the surface. "I asked if you looked under the table." Marcus frowned, clearly confused by the direction of the conversation. "Sir, is there a problem? Did you lose something?" The man didn't break eye contact with Diane. "That depends." Diane's mind raced. This wasn't a normal interaction. Nothing about this felt normal. The deliberate placement of the USB drive, the insulting tip, the man's sudden return, all of it pointed to something calculated, something planned. But what? And more importantly, why involve her? She made a decision. "Yes," she said quietly. "I looked under the table." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or satisfaction. "And what did you see?" Diane glanced at Marcus, who now looked thoroughly bewildered. "Marcus, can I speak with this gentleman alone for a moment?" Marcus hesitated, his manager instincts clearly warring with his curiosity. "Diane, if there's an issue—" "There's no issue," the man interrupted smoothly, pulling out his wallet. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and handed it to Marcus. "For the inconvenience, and for giving us 5 minutes." Marcus stared at the bill, then at the man, then at Diane. Finally, he pocketed the money and nodded. 5 minutes. I'll be at the register if you need anything." He walked away, casting one last suspicious glance over his shoulder. When they were alone, the man gestured toward table 12. "Shall we sit?" Diane didn't move. "Who are you?" "Someone who needs help," he said simply, and someone who chose very carefully who to ask. By leaving a $1 tip and a USB drive under a table, a flicker of something, guilt, regret, crossed his face. The tip was necessary. I needed to see how you'd react. Whether you'd cause a scene, complain to management, or just absorb it quietly. "You were testing me," Diane said, anger finally seeping into her voice. "I was observing you," he corrected. "There's a difference. And you passed." "Passed what exactly?" The man pulled out a chair and sat down, motioning for her to do the same. After a moment's hesitation, Diane sat across from him, her posture rigid, her hands folded in her lap. She could feel the weight of the coin still in her apron pocket, a small, sharp reminder of her humiliation. "My name is Ethan Volkov," the man said, leaning forward slightly. "And I'm not who you think I am." "I don't think you're anyone," Diane replied. "I don't know you." "Exactly, and that's why I need you." He paused, studying her face. "Tell me, Diane. And yes, I know your name. It's on your name tag. How long have you worked here?" 6 years. "And in those 6 years, how many people have actually seen you? Really seen you?" The question caught her off guard. She wanted to say it was a stupid question, that everyone saw her, but the truth lodged in her throat like a stone. Because he was right. She was invisible. To the customers, to management, even to most of her co-workers. She was a function, not a person. A pair of hands that cleared tables and refilled water glasses. "That's what I thought," Ethan said quietly, reading her silence. "You're the most invisible person in this room, which makes you the most valuable." "Valuable for what?" Ethan glanced toward the front of the restaurant where Marcus stood, then back at Diane. 3 months ago, my sister disappeared. Her name is Sophie. Sophie Volkov. She was 24 years old, a graduate student at Penn, studying criminal justice. She was brilliant, careful, cautious, not the type to just vanish. Diane's expression softened slightly. "Did you file a police report?" "Of course, but the police found nothing. No body, no evidence of foul play, no financial irregularities, no digital trail. According to them, she's just another adult who chose to walk away from her life." His jaw tightened. "But Sophie wouldn't do that. Not to our mother. Not to me." "I'm sorry about your sister," Diane said genuinely. "But I don't understand what this has to do with me, or that USB drive." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming once on the table before going still. 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous email. No sender information, routed through multiple VPNs, impossible to trace. The message said, "Sophie saw something she shouldn't have. If you want to know what happened to her, come to Mercer's Bistro. Table 12, 8 p.m. December 18th. Look down. That's tonight. That's now." A chill ran down Diane's spine. Why would someone send you that? "Because whoever took Sophie wants me to find that USB drive, but they don't want it to be obvious. They don't want security footage showing me picking something up, don't want witnesses, don't want any connection between me and whatever's on that drive." He leaned forward again, his voice dropping. "But they didn't account for you." "For me?" Diane shook her head. "I'm nobody. You're the person who cleans up after everyone else. The person no one notices. The person who looks where others don't." Ethan's eyes were intense now, almost pleading. "I left that insultingly small tip because I needed to know if you'd just pocket it and walk away, or if you'd actually pay attention to the table. If you'd care enough to do your job properly even when you were treated like garbage." Diane felt her anger reignite. "So you humiliated me as some kind of character test? I needed to know if you were thorough, if you were observant, if you were someone I could trust." He paused. "And when you bent down to look under that table, even though you had no reason to, even though I just insulted you with that tip, I knew you were." Diane stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. I'm not getting involved in whatever this is. Your sister, the USB drive, the mysterious emails, that's police business, not mine." "The police have already failed," Ethan said, not moving from his seat. "And whoever has Sophie knows I went to them. That's why they're doing this. They're playing a game, and I have to play by their rules if I want to see my sister again." "Then play your game without me." Diane started to walk away. "There's $50,000 in it for you." She stopped. Slowly, she turned back to face him. Ethan pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up so she could see. It was a bank account screen showing a balance that made Diane's breath catch. "Help me figure out what's on that USB drive. Help me find Sophie, and that money is yours." No questions asked, no strings attached. Diane stared at the screen, her mind reeling. $50,000. That was more than she made in 2 years at Mercer's. That was rent paid for a year. Her mother's medical bills covered, her son's college fund finally started. That was everything. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could hire a private investigator, a tech expert, someone who actually knows what they're doing. Because whoever took Sophie is watching me. My phone, my computer, my financial records. I have to assume it's all compromised. If I hire someone, they'll know. If I involve anyone in my circle, they'll know." He stood now, closing the distance between them. "But you're outside all of that. You're invisible. You can move through spaces without drawing attention. You can ask questions without raising alarms, and right now that invisibility is the most powerful tool I have. Diane looked down at her hands, rough and worn from years of hard labor. She thought about her apartment in West Philadelphia, the leaky ceiling she couldn't afford to fix. She thought about her son, Marcus Jr., a 14 years old and too smart for his own good, who deserved better than the neighborhood school he was stuck in. She thought about her mother, whose diabetes medication kept getting more expensive. She thought about being invisible. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I need to know everything. No more games. No more tests." Ethan nodded. "Agreed. And I need to know what's on that USB drive before I decide if I'm really doing this." "Fair enough." He gestured toward the table. "Did you take it?" Diane reached into her apron pocket, passed the humiliating coins, and pulled out the small blue USB drive. She'd grabbed it the moment Marcus had turned his back, instinct overriding caution. She held it up between them, the overhead lights making the metal connector gleam. "Then let's find out what we're dealing with," Ethan said quietly. They sat back down at table 12. Ethan pulled out a laptop from his messenger bag, a sleek, expensive model that probably cost more than Diane's monthly rent. He powered it on, the screen casting a blue glow across both their faces. "Before we do this," Diane said, "I need to know something. If what's on this drive is dangerous, if it puts my family at risk, then we stop," Ethan said firmly. "I won't ask you to put your family in danger. But Diane, my sister is out there somewhere, and every day that passes," his voice cracked slightly, "every day that passes, the odds of finding her alive drop." Diane handed him the USB drive. Ethan inserted it into the laptop. The computer whirred softly. Processing. A window popped up showing the drive's contents. A single folder labeled Proof. He clicked it open. Inside were 3 files. A video file labeled Warehouse 1114-2024 MP4. A PDF document labeled Financial Records PDF. And an audio file labeled Conversation 12-1-2024 M4A. Ethan's hand hovered over the trackpad. Which one first? Diane's instincts, honed by years of reading people and situations, screamed at her. This was the moment. The moment where she could still walk away, return to her invisible life, stay safe. Or the moment where she stepped into something that would change everything. She thought about that dollar tip. About being treated like she didn't matter. About being invisible. "The video," she said. "Start with the video." Ethan double-clicked the file. The screen went black for a moment, then flickered to life. The footage was grainy, clearly from a security camera or hidden recording device. It showed the interior of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Concrete floors, exposed beams, dim lighting. In the center of the frame, a young woman was tied to a chair. Even in the poor quality of the footage, Diane could see the terror in her eyes. "Sophie," Ethan breathed, his voice breaking. And then, from off-camera, a voice spoke. A voice that was calm, professional, and utterly chilling. "Hello, Ethan. If you're watching this, it means you followed our instructions. Good. Now let's talk about what your sister saw and what it's going to cost to get her back." The video continued, but Diane wasn't watching the screen anymore. She was watching Ethan's face, the way the color drained from it, the way his hands trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of the laptop. She had made her choice. Whatever happened next, she was in this now. The voice on the video was distorted, likely run through some kind of audio filter to disguise the speaker's identity. But the words were clear, precise, and delivered with the kind of cold calculation that made Diane's blood run cold. "Your sister stumbled onto something she shouldn't have seen," the voice continued. Sophie remained motionless in the chair, her head slightly bowed, her blonde hair falling across her face. "A transaction. A very specific transaction involving people who value their privacy. People who don't appreciate curious graduate students playing detective." Ethan's knuckles were white where they gripped the laptop. Diane could see a vein pulsing in his temple. His jaw clenched so tight she worried he might crack a tooth. "We could have simply eliminated the problem," the voice said, almost conversationally. "But we're not monsters, Ethan. We're businessmen. So instead, we're offering you a choice." The financial records in that folder contain proof of transactions totaling $47 million. Transactions that certain people would very much like to keep hidden. Transactions that, if exposed, would destroy lives, end careers, and put some very powerful people in federal prison. The camera angle shifted slightly, zooming in on Sophie's face. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was still defiance there. Still fight. You have 72 hours, the voice said. 72 hours to decide what matters more, justice or family. If you go to the police, if you go to the FBI, if you show those financial records to anyone in law enforcement, your sister dies. If you give us the USB drive back, if you walk away and forget everything you've seen, Sophie goes home. It's that simple. The video showed a gloved hand entering the frame, placing a piece of paper in front of Sophie. She didn't look at it. The audio file contains instructions for the exchange. Follow them exactly. Deviate in any way and you'll never see your sister again. A pause. Oh, and Ethan? We know you went to Mercer's Bistro tonight. We know you retrieved the drive. We're watching. We're always watching. So choose wisely. The video ended abruptly, leaving the laptop screen black. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The restaurant around them continued its evening rhythm. The distant clatter of dishes, the murmur of the remaining customers, the soft jazz playing through the overhead speakers. But at table 12, there was only silence. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice hollow. She's alive. She's been alive this whole time. Diane reached across the table without thinking, her hand covering his. We're going to find her. Ethan looked up at her, and she saw the tears he was fighting to hold back. Did you hear what they said? If I go to the police, they kill her. If I expose those financial records, they kill her. They've backed me into a corner. Then we don't go to the police, Diane said firmly. Not yet. Not until we know more. You heard them. They're watching me. They probably followed me here. Probably know I'm talking to you right now. Which is exactly why I'm perfect for this, Diane interrupted. She pulled her hand back, her mind already working through possibilities. You said it yourself, I'm invisible. No one pays attention to me. I can move around, ask questions, dig into things without raising red flags. Ethan shook his head. I can't ask you to do that. These people, whoever they are, they've already kidnapped my sister. They're obviously connected, powerful, dangerous. If they think you're helping me, they won't think anything about me, Diane said. Because I'm just a cleaning lady in a restaurant. I'm nobody. The words tasted bitter, but they were true. And for the first time in her life, her invisibility felt like an advantage rather than an insult. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. Why are you doing this? The money isn't worth your life. Maybe not, Diane admitted. But I've spent 6 years being treated like furniture. Being ignored, dismissed, looked through like I'm not even there. And you know what? I got used to it. I told myself it didn't matter, that as long as the paycheck came, I could handle it. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But tonight, you left me $1. $1 single. And it made me so angry I wanted to scream. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. That I wasn't even worth the effort of basic decency. I'm sorry, Ethan said quietly. I meant what I said. It was necessary, but that doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't, Diane agreed. But it also woke something up in me. Made me realize that I'm tired of being invisible. Tired of being nobody. Maybe this is my chance to be someone who matters. Someone who makes a difference. She gestured toward the laptop. Your sister is out there, scared and alone, and these people think they can just take her and get away with it because they have money and power. Well, I've cleaned up after men with money and power for years. I've seen how they treat people, how they think the rules don't apply to them, and I'm tired of it. Ethan's expression softened. You're tougher than you look. I've had to be. Diane glanced toward the front of the restaurant where Marcus was still at the register, no doubt wondering what was taking so long. We need to look at those financial records. See what Sophie discovered. Ethan navigated back to the folder and opened the PDF. The document was dense. Page after page of bank transfers, shell company names, routing numbers, and dates. But even to Diane's untrained eye, the patterns were clear. Money flowing in from multiple sources, being laundered through various accounts, then disappearing into offshore holdings. This is a money laundering operation, Ethan said, scrolling through the pages. And it's huge. $47 million like they said. But look at the dates. These transactions go back 3 years. This isn't some one-time deal. This is systematic, organized. Diane leaned closer, squinting at the screen. What are these company names? Delaware Holdings, LLC, Riverside Management Group, Chesapeake Investments. Shell companies, Ethan explained. Fake businesses set up to hide the real source of the money. It's classic money laundering. You take illegal money, drugs, weapons, whatever, and you run it through legitimate-looking businesses to clean it. Can you trace them? Figure out who's behind them? Maybe, but it'll take time, and expertise I don't have. He scrolled to the bottom of the document where there was a handwritten note. photographed and included in the PDF. The handwriting was neat, precise. Sophie's handwriting, Diane assumed. The note read, "Traced primary accounts to Philadelphia City Council. Check Councilman Richard Marsh campaign finances. Cross-reference with Riverfront Development Project permits. They're using city contracts to launder money." Diane felt her stomach drop. City Council? This involves the government? Ethan's face had gone pale. Richard Marsh, I know that name. He's been a city councilman for 12 years. He's running for mayor in the spring. He stopped abruptly, realization dawning. He's untouchable. If we go after him, if we expose this, they'll kill your sister. Diane finished. They sat in silence, the weight of the situation settling over them like a shroud. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was corruption at the highest levels of city government, backed by people with the resources and connections to make problems. And people disappear. "Play the audio file," Diane said. "We need to hear the instructions." Ethan clicked on the audio file. A different voice this time, also distorted but with a distinct Boston accent bleeding through the filter. "Listen carefully. Thursday night, December 20th, at midnight, you will go to the old Port Richmond warehouse on Delaware Avenue. Pier 42. Come alone. Bring the USB drive. Leave it in the metal drop box at the north entrance. Once we verify the contents haven't been copied, haven't been sent to anyone, you'll receive a text message with Sophie's location. Follow these instructions exactly. Bring anyone with you, call the police, or fail to show up, and your sister dies. You have 48 hours. The audio file ended. Diane did the math quickly. That gives us 2 days to figure out how to save your sister without giving them what they want. That's impossible, Ethan said flatly. They have all the leverage. They have Sophie. They're watching me. Even if we could somehow copy these files, get them to someone who could act on them, they'd know. And Sophie would be dead before anyone could help her. Then we need to be smarter than they are, Diane said. She pulled out her phone, an old iPhone with a cracked screen, and began typing notes. "Tell me everything you know about Sophie's research. What was she studying? How did she find this information in the first place?" Ethan rubbed his face, exhaustion finally showing through. She was writing her thesis on municipal corruption, how criminal enterprises use government contracts to legitimize illegal income. She'd been researching public records, following money trails, interviewing former city employees. She was brilliant at it. Too brilliant. So she found something in public records that led her to Marsh. Must have. Sophie was meticulous. She wouldn't make accusations without proof. If she wrote that note, it means she had evidence linking Marsh to those shell companies. Diane's mind raced. Public records are just that, public. Which means if Sophie found it, we can find it too. We can reconstruct her research, figure out exactly what she discovered and how. But if they're watching me, they're not watching me, Diane said firmly. I can go to the city records office, pull files, ask questions. I'm just a curious citizen, nothing suspicious about that. These people kidnapped my sister for getting too close. What makes you think they won't do the same to you? Because they don't know I exist, Diane said. And by the time they figure it out, we'll have enough evidence to bury them. Ethan looked at her with something like admiration. You really think we can do this? I think we have to try. Diane stood, tucking her phone back into her pocket. But we need to be smart. No more meetings here, no phone calls unless absolutely necessary. We can't give them any reason to connect us. How will we communicate? Diane thought for a moment. You know the free library on Vine Street? The big one downtown? Yes. There's a reading room on the 3rd floor. Quiet, lots of people coming and going, plenty of security cameras, but nothing focused on individual tables. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Bring your laptop. I'll bring whatever I can find at City Records. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay, that works. Diane glanced toward Marcus, who was now actively watching them with poorly concealed curiosity. I need to get back to work before I lose my job. But Ethan, don't do anything stupid between now and tomorrow. Don't try to be a hero. Just stay calm, stay safe, and let me do my part. I don't even know how to thank you, Ethan said, standing as well. Thank me when we get your sister back. Diane picked up her cleaning bin, the coins in her pocket jingling softly, a reminder of where this had all started. And Ethan, that $50,000 you mentioned? Yes, make it 60. I'm putting my life on the line here. Might as well make it worth it. For the first time since the video ended, Ethan smiled. Just barely, but it was there. Deal. Diane walked away from table 12, returning to her invisible life among the other tables. the other customers who would never see her. But now, that invisibility felt different. It felt like armor. She had 48 hours to become someone who mattered, and she wasn't going to waste a single minute. The Philadelphia City Archives building stood on Market Street like a forgotten monument to bureaucracy, a squat, gray concrete structure wedged between modern glass office towers. Diane arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, 45 minutes before her shift at Mercer's would normally begin. She'd called in sick, something she'd done maybe 3 times in 6 years. Marcus had sounded suspicious on the phone, but she'd coughed convincingly and promised she'd be back tomorrow. The morning was cold, the kind of December cold that seeped through coats and settled in your bones. Diane's breath came out in white puffs as she climbed the worn stone steps. She wore her best outfit, a navy blue pantsuit she'd bought for her son's 8th grade graduation, paired with sensible black flats. Professional, forgettable, exactly what she needed. Inside, the building smelled like old paper and floor wax. The lobby was dimly lit, with fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. A security guard sat behind a desk, an older black man with gray hair and kind eyes who barely glanced up as she signed the visitor log. "Records office is on the 2nd floor," he said, his voice carrying the gentle rasp of a longtime smoker. "Elevator's broken, so you'll have to take the stairs." "Thank you," Diane said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. The stairs creaked under her feet as she climbed. The 2nd floor was a maze of narrow hallways lined with metal filing cabinets and industrial shelving units loaded with bankers' boxes. The air was stale, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the rhythmic clacking of someone typing on an old keyboard. The records office itself was a large room divided by a long counter. Behind it, a thin white woman in her 50s sat at a desk, surrounded by stacks of files and folders. She wore thick glasses and a cardigan that had seen better days. Her nameplate read, "Eleanor Pritchard." "Help you?" Eleanor asked without looking up from her computer screen. Diane approached the counter, her prepared story ready. "Yes, hi. I'm doing research for a community project on city development contracts. Specifically, the Riverfront Development Project permits from the last 3 years." Now Eleanor looked up, her expression mildly curious. "Community project? What kind?" "Urban renewal initiatives," Diane said smoothly. She'd practiced this in front of her bathroom mirror that morning. "I'm part of a citizens group looking at how development projects impact local neighborhoods. We want to understand the permit process, who gets approved, that sort of thing." It wasn't entirely a lie. There were citizens groups that did exactly that kind of work. Diane had just never been part of one. Eleanor studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "You'll need to fill out a records request form. Development permits are public record, so there shouldn't be any issue." She rummaged through a drawer and produced a form on a clipboard. "Fill this out, and I'll pull what we have." Diane took the clipboard to a small table near the window and began filling out the form. Name, address, purpose of request. She wrote carefully, her handwriting neat and unremarkable. Just another citizen exercising her right to public information. She returned the form to Eleanor, who glanced at it briefly before standing with an audible crack of her knees. "This might take a while. We've got 3 years' worth of permits, and the Riverfront project was huge. Probably looking at 2, maybe 3 boxes of files." "I've got time," Diane said. Eleanor disappeared into the labyrinth of shelves. Diane could hear her moving around, the scrape of boxes being pulled, the rustle of papers. While she waited, Diane surveyed the room. There were 2 security cameras, one pointed at the entrance, one at the counter. Standard placement. Nothing that would catch someone at the reading tables. 15 minutes later, Eleanor returned, rolling a cart with 3 large banker's boxes stacked on top. "Here you go. Riverfront Development Permits 2022 through 2024. You can use table 3 over there." She pointed to a long table in the corner away from the windows. "Copy machines 5 cents a page if you need it. No phones. No photography of documents." "Understood. Thank you." Diane carried the first box to table 3 and began her search. The files were organized chronologically, each permit application bundled with supporting documents, architectural plans, environmental impact statements, and approval signatures. It was tedious work, made more difficult by the fact that she didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but Sophie had known. Sophie had found the connection between these permits and Councilman Marsh's money laundering operation. Diane just had to figure out how. She started with the basics, looking for patterns. Which companies had been awarded contracts? Who had signed the approvals? What were the dollar amounts involved? After an hour, her eyes were starting to blur from reading tiny print in poor lighting. She'd filled 3 pages of her notebook with company names, dates, and figures, but nothing was jumping out at her. Nothing obvious, at least. Then she found it, buried in a permit application from March 2023, a construction contract for the Riverfront Project's parking garage structure. The contractor was Delaware Holdings LLC, one of the shell companies from the USB drive's financial records. Diane's pulse quickened. She flipped through the next several files looking for similar connections. There, another one. Riverside Management Group, contracted for electrical work, June 2023, and another, Chesapeake Investments, landscaping design, September 2023. All of the shell companies from the financial records had been awarded contracts for the Riverfront project, and every single approval was signed by Richard Marsh in his capacity as chairman of the City Development Committee. But that alone wasn't enough. Public officials signed off on contracts all the time. What Diane needed was proof that Marsh was using his position to funnel money through these fake companies. She pulled out the financial records Ethan had copied onto her USB drive last night. Cross-referencing the dates, she began to see the pattern. Each time a contract was approved, money would flow into one of the shell company's accounts. Large sums, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions. Then within days, that money would be transferred out through a complex web of accounts, eventually disappearing offshore. The contracts were legitimate on paper, but the work was never fully completed. Or if it was done by subcontractors who were paid a fraction of the contracted amount. The difference, the profit, was being siphoned off and laundered. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Use real government projects to legitimize illegal money. Award contracts to companies you control. Do the minimum work required to avoid scrutiny. Pocket the difference. And Richard Marsh was at the center of it all. Diane was so focused on her discovery that she didn't notice the man until he was standing right behind her. Find anything interesting? She jumped, her heart slamming against her ribs. She turned to see a man in his 40s, white, with close-cropped brown hair and a navy suit that screamed law enforcement. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp, assessing. Just doing some research, Diane said, forcing her voice to stay calm. She casually closed her notebook, trying not to look guilty. Research on what, specifically? The man's tone was conversational, but there was steel underneath. Community development projects. I'm part of a citizens group. She repeated the same story she'd told Eleanor, but her hands were trembling slightly. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's funny, because I've been tracking municipal corruption for 10 years, and I've never heard of any citizens group doing this kind of deep dive into permit records. He pulled out a badge from his jacket. Detective James Holloway, Philadelphia Police Department, Public Corruption Unit. Diane's blood turned to ice. Now, Holloway said, pulling out the chair next to her and sitting down, why don't you tell me what you're really looking for? And more importantly, who sent you? Diane's mind raced. This was the worst possible scenario. If she told the truth, if she mentioned Sophie or Ethan or the kidnapping, the people holding Sophie would know. They'd said they were watching. They'd kill her. But if she lied, if this detective was legitimate and could help them, she might be throwing away their only chance at saving Sophie through official channels. I'm just a concerned citizen, Diane said carefully. I read about the Riverfront project in the paper, wanted to see how the city spends taxpayer money. Holloway studied her face. You're lying, and you're scared. I can see it. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Look, I don't know what you've stumbled into, but if you're investigating Richard Marsh, you need to be very careful. That man has connections that go all the way to the mayor's office. He's protected. I don't know what you're talking about. Those shell companies you've been cross-referencing? Holloway nodded toward her notebook. I've been investigating them for 2 years. Delaware Holdings, Riverside Management, Chesapeake Investments. They're all part of a massive money laundering operation, and they all lead back to Marsh. Diane's eyes widened despite herself. Holloway's expression softened slightly. Here's what I think happened. Someone you know, a friend, a family member, maybe someone you're working for, got too close to this investigation, and now you're trying to help them. Am I warm? Diane said nothing. Silence speaks volumes, Holloway said. He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. I can help, but I need to know what you know. I need to know if there's evidence, if there are witnesses, if there's any... I can't, Diane whispered. I can't tell you anything. Why not? Because if I do, someone innocent will die. The words hung in the air between them. Holloway's expression changed, hardening into something grim and knowing. "They have a hostage," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Diane's silence was answer enough. Holloway cursed under his breath. "Damn it. Okay, listen to me very carefully. If they've taken someone and they're demanding silence in exchange for their life, you are in way over your head. These people, whoever they are, they're professionals. They've done this before. And they will not hesitate to kill." "I know," Diane said, her voice barely audible. "Then you also know that the chances of them actually releasing the hostage are slim to none. Even if you give them what they want, even if you stay silent, they'll likely eliminate the witness anyway. So what am I supposed to do?" Diane's voice cracked. "Just let them kill her? Just give up? Her?" Holloway's eyes sharpened. "It's a woman. Young, related to someone connected to Marsh's operation?" Diane realized her mistake too late. Holloway pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "There have been 3 missing persons reports filed in the last 6 months that might fit that profile. Let me guess. Graduate student, researcher. Someone smart enough to connect the dots?" "Please," Diane said desperately. "Please stop. If they find out I talked to you, if they know the police are involved." "They already know," Holloway interrupted. "Trust me, if they're smart enough to run a multi-million-dollar laundering operation through city contracts, they're smart enough to have people watching this building. They probably know you're here right now." The fear that had been simmering in Diane's stomach exploded into full panic. "Then I need to leave. I need to—" "No." Holloway's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Not hard, but firm. "If you run now, you'll only confirm their suspicions. You need to finish your research, check out normally, and walk out of here like nothing happened. Can you do that?" Diane nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." He released her wrist and stood. "I'm going to leave now. I was never here. This conversation never happened. But I want you to know something. I've been trying to take down Richard Marsh for 2 years, and every time I get close, evidence disappears, witnesses recant, or someone higher up shuts down the investigation. He's got protection. Real protection. The kind that means even with evidence, it'll be nearly impossible to make charges stick." "Then what's the point?" Diane asked bitterly. "The point," Holloway said, "is that every empire eventually falls. And when Marsh's empire comes down, I want to be there to put the cuffs on him myself." He tapped his business card on the table. "When you're ready to talk, and you will be, because this situation is going to get worse before it gets better, call me. Day or night. I'll answer." He walked away, his footsteps echoing across the tile floor. Diane watched him leave, her heart still pounding, her hands still shaking. She looked down at the files spread across the table, at her notebook filled with evidence of corruption, at the business card Holloway had left behind. She thought about Sophie, tied to that chair in the warehouse, about Ethan's desperation, about the deadline that was ticking ever closer, and she thought about Detective Holloway's words. The chances of them actually releasing the hostage are slim to none. What if he was right? What if, even after all this, even if they followed every instruction perfectly, Sophie was already dead, or would be killed anyway? Diane's hands clenched into fists. No, she couldn't think like that. She had to believe there was a way to save Sophie and bring down Marsh. There had to be. She spent another hour in the archives, carefully photographing pages with her phone despite Eleanor's rules, making sure she had copies of every relevant document. Then she packed up, returned the boxes to Eleanor with a polite thank you, and left the building. The cold air hit her face like a slap, clearing some of the fog from her mind. She checked her watch. Noon. She had 2 hours before her meeting with Ethan at the library. As she walked down Market Street toward the subway station, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every person who passed seemed suspicious. Every car that slowed near the curb seemed threatening. Holloway was right. They were watching. They had to be. But the question was, what were they going to do about it? The Free Library of Philadelphia's Central Branch loomed over Vine Street like a Greek temple transplanted to modern America. Its limestone facade and massive columns spoke of a time when public institutions were built to inspire awe. Diane had walked past it hundreds of times but had never been inside. Libraries were for people with time to spare, and she'd never had that luxury. Until now. She pushed through the heavy bronze doors at 1:55 p.m., 5 minutes early. The interior was stunning. Vaulted ceilings, marble floors, and the hushed reverence that only libraries possessed. The smell of old books mixed with floor polish filled her nostrils. A few people moved through the lobby, but not many. Midweek afternoons were quiet times. Diane climbed the grand staircase to the third floor, her sensible flats making barely a sound on the worn stone steps. The reading room Ethan had mentioned was exactly as she'd imagined. High ceilings, long wooden tables, green-shaded reading lamps casting pools of warm light. Perhaps 30 people scattered throughout the space, most with laptops or books, lost in their own worlds. She spotted Ethan immediately. He sat at a corner table near the tall windows overlooking the street below, his laptop open, a stack of books beside him creating the illusion of legitimate research. He wore jeans and a hooded sweatshirt today, looking more like a graduate student than the wealthy businessman from the restaurant. Trying to blend in, Diane approached, sliding into the chair across from him. He looked up, and she was shocked by his appearance. The man from 2 nights ago had been composed, in control. The man before her now had dark circles under his eyes, stubble on his jaw, and a haunted look that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting desperation. "Did you find anything?" he asked immediately, his voice low and urgent. "We can't talk here," Diane whispered, glancing around. Too exposed. Then where? Diane had thought about this during her subway ride from City Hall. Public places were monitored. Private places could be bugged. They needed somewhere with background noise, somewhere they could blend into the crowd without being overheard. "Reading Terminal Market," she said. 15 minutes. The area by the Amish market stands. Ethan nodded and began packing his laptop. Diane stood and walked away first, taking the stairs down to the main floor and exiting through a side door onto 19th Street. She walked 2 blocks south, checking behind her every few seconds, trying to spot anyone who might be following. The mid-December afternoon was overcast, threatening snow. Christmas decorations hung from the street lamps, their cheerful colors at odds with the gray sky and the fear churning in Diane's stomach. She pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. Reading Terminal Market was crowded, as it always was during lunch hours. The massive food hall stretched beneath the old Reading Railroad terminal, packed with vendors selling everything from fresh produce to Philly cheesesteaks. The noise was overwhelming. Vendors calling out, customers ordering, the general din of hundreds of conversations happening simultaneously. Perfect. Diane made her way to the back corner where the Amish vendors sold fresh-baked goods and handmade crafts. She pretended to browse the pastries while keeping an eye on the entrance. 5 minutes later, Ethan appeared, looking around until he spotted her. He joined her at the counter, both of them facing the display of shoofly pies and whoopie cakes as if they were regular customers trying to decide what to buy. "Tell me," Ethan said, his voice barely audible over the market noise. Diane pulled out her phone, opening the photos she'd taken at the city archives. Sophie was right. Every single shell company from those financial records was awarded contracts for the Riverfront Development Project, and every approval was signed by Richard Marsh. She showed him the photos, swiping through them slowly enough for him to process what he was seeing. The pattern is clear. Contract approved. Money flows in. Minimal work done. Money laundered out through offshore accounts. It's been happening for 3 years. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's enough to bury him. We take this to the press, to the FBI. "It's not that simple," Diane interrupted. She told him about Detective Holloway, about the encounter at the archives, about everything the detective had said regarding Marsh's protection, and the likelihood that Sophie would be killed regardless of what they did. As she spoke, she watched the color drain from Ethan's face. When she finished, he leaned against the counter looking like he might be sick. "So even if we do everything they ask," he said slowly, "even if we hand over the USB drive and stay silent, Sophie probably dies anyway. Holloway said it's unlikely they'd leave a witness alive. Then what do we do?" The desperation in his voice was raw, painful to hear. Diane had been thinking about this since leaving the archives. "We need more than just evidence of the money laundering. We need leverage. Something that makes keeping Sophie alive more valuable to them than killing her." "Like what?" "Like proof that even if they kill her, even if they kill us, the evidence still goes public. An insurance policy." Diane pulled Ethan away from the counter as an Amish woman approached to help them. They walked slowly through the market, weaving between other shoppers. "We need to make copies of everything. Multiple copies. Store them in different places. Set up a dead man's switch. If we don't check in every 12 hours, the evidence automatically gets sent to media outlets, the FBI, the state attorney general. They said they're watching. If they see us making copies, distributing evidence, then we have to be smarter than them," Diane said firmly. "We have to move in ways they won't expect." Use methods they won't think to monitor. Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. How? Diane had thought about this too. About her years of invisibility. About moving through spaces without being noticed. About all the people in service positions, cleaning staff, food service workers, delivery drivers, who society had trained itself not to see. My son, she said, Marcus Jr., he's 14, computer savvy, and nobody pays attention to a black teenager on a bus with a backpack. He can take copies of the USB drive, distribute them to locations around the city, libraries, internet cafes, places with public computers, upload everything to cloud storage accounts with delayed release timers. You want to involve your son in this? Ethan looked horrified. Diane, these people have already killed. They've already put my life at risk the moment I decided to help you. Diane interrupted. And if they're watching me as closely as Detective Holloway thinks, they probably already know about Marcus Jr. At least this way, he's doing something that keeps us all safer. Plus, he'll be in public places surrounded by people, safer than either of us. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, the gesture of a man at the end of his rope. This is insane. All of it. We're playing spy games against people who kill for a living. No, Diane corrected. We're fighting for an innocent woman's life against people who think they're untouchable. There's a difference. They reached the far end of the market, near the exit onto 12th Street. Through the glass doors, Diane could see pedestrians hurrying past. Everyone absorbed in their own lives, their own problems. None of them knew that just a few feet away, two people were planning something that could either save a life or get them all killed. There's something else, Diane said quietly. Something Holloway said that's been bothering me. He said he's been investigating Marsh for 2 years, and every time he gets close, evidence disappears or witnesses recant. Someone higher up keeps shutting down the investigation. Meaning Marsh has protection from within the police department? Or higher? Maybe the mayor's office, maybe the district attorney. Diane pulled out Detective Holloway's business card from her pocket. Holloway seemed genuine, frustrated, like he actually wants to take Marsh down. But I don't know if we can trust him. What if he's part of it? What if showing up at the archives was a test to see how much we know? Then we're screwed either way, Ethan said bluntly. Not necessarily. Diane thought about the audio file with the exchange instructions. They want you at that warehouse tomorrow night at midnight, alone, with the USB drive. That's their plan. But what if we have our own plan? What if we don't play by their rules? Explain. They expect you to show up, hand over the drive, and hope they keep their word about releasing Sophie. But what if we're already at the warehouse before you arrive? What if we find Sophie first, get her out, and then they show up to an empty exchange? Ethan stared at her. You want to break into a criminal warehouse and rescue my sister before they expect us? That's actually insane. Is it? Diane challenged. Think about it. They're expecting us to be scared, compliant, desperate. They're not expecting us to go on the offensive. And they definitely won't expect someone like me to be the one doing it. Someone like you? Invisible, Diane said simply. I've spent the last 6 years learning how to be ignored, how to move through spaces without drawing attention. That's a skill, Ethan. One that might actually save your sister's life. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. Even if we could get into the warehouse, how would we find her? These places are huge, she could be anywhere, they could have guards, security systems, alarms. Then we need information. We need to know the layout, need to know how many people are there, need to know exactly where they're keeping her. Diane pulled out her phone again, opening a map application. Where's this warehouse, Pier 42 on Delaware Avenue? Ethan pulled out his own phone, looking at the location. It's in Port Richmond, industrial area, mostly abandoned buildings and old shipping facilities. The whole waterfront up there is basically dead, which makes it perfect for holding someone captive, Diane said. No neighbors to hear screams, no foot traffic to witness anything suspicious. But it also means we can get close without being obvious. We'd need to scout it first, see what we're dealing with. Tonight, Diane said decisively. After dark. We go look at the warehouse, figure out entry points, see if there are any signs of activity. And if there are guards, then we adjust our plan. Diane checked her watch. It was 2:45 p.m. We have about 33 hours until the exchange deadline. That gives us tonight to scout, tomorrow to prepare, and tomorrow night to act. Ethan looked at her with something between admiration and terror. You really think we can pull this off? Just the two of us against God knows how many criminals? Not just the two of us, Diane said. She thought about her network, the other invisible people who move through the city every day, the cleaning crews who worked in office buildings after hours, the security guards who sat at desks reading books because nobody ever bothered them. The delivery drivers who had access to places most people never saw. I know people who can help, people who, like me, have spent their lives being ignored and might actually want to matter for once. Diane, I'm not asking your permission, she said firmly. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Tonight we scout the warehouse. Tomorrow we prepare. Tomorrow night we save your sister. Then we burn Richard Marsh's empire to the ground. The conviction in her voice surprised even herself. This wasn't the same woman who had silently accepted that dollar tip 2 nights ago. Something had shifted inside her, something fundamental. She'd spent years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated as if her life and work didn't matter. But Sophie's life mattered. And maybe, just maybe, Diane's life mattered too. Ethan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, we do this your way. But I have one condition. What? That $60,000 I promised you? Consider it 100, because if we somehow pull this off, you'll have earned every penny. Despite everything, the fear, the danger, the impossible odds, Diane felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. Make it 120. Call it hazard pay. For the first time since she'd met him, Ethan actually laughed. It was a brief, slightly hysterical sound, but it was genuine. Deal. They left the market separately, Diane first, then Ethan 5 minutes later. As Diane walked back toward the subway station, she pulled out her phone and sent a text to her son. Need you to do something important for me tonight. Something that might actually make a difference. Are you in? The response came back almost immediately. Always, Mom. What do we need to do? Diane smiled. Her son had inherited her stubborn streak, her refusal to back down when something mattered. He'd understand. He'd help. She descended into the subway station, joining the flow of anonymous commuters heading home from work. Around her, hundreds of people moved through their daily routines, unaware that among them was a woman who had decided to stop being invisible. Tomorrow night, everything would change. Tomorrow night, Sophie Volkov would go home. And tomorrow night, Richard Marsh would learn that even the most powerful people could be brought down by someone they'd never bothered to see. As the subway train pulled into the station, Diane's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her heart rate spiked, but she forced herself to open it. Who? The message was simple, chilling. We know what you did today. The archives. The detective. Smart girl, but not smart enough. You have 28 hours. Don't make us remind you what happens if you deviate from the plan. Below the text was a photo. It was taken from a distance, grainy, but clear enough. It showed Diane and Detective Holloway at the archives talking at the table. They had been watching. They'd seen everything. Diane's hands trembled as she stared at the photo. They knew. They knew she'd talked to the police, knew she'd gathered evidence, knew she wasn't just some random cleaning lady anymore. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Diane Carter wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. She deleted the message, boarded the train, and headed home to plan a rescue mission. The real game was just beginning. The warehouse at Pier 42 looked exactly like what it was. A monument to Philadelphia's industrial past, slowly rotting into oblivion. The building stood 3 stories tall, its red brick facade stained with decades of grime and weather damage. Windows on the upper floors were either broken or boarded over. Graffiti covered the lower walls, tags layered upon tags until the original brick was barely visible beneath the spray paint. It was 11:17 p.m. on Thursday night. Diane crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers about 50 yards from the warehouse's north entrance, her breath coming out in white puffs in the December cold. She wore all black, jeans, a turtleneck, a knit cap pulled low over her hair. Practical, invisible. Beside her, Marcus Jr. adjusted the night vision monocular he'd borrowed from his friend whose father was a security guard. At 14, her son was tall for his age, gangly in that awkward teenage way, but his hands were steady as he surveyed the warehouse. 2 guards, he whispered. One at the north entrance like they said in the audio file, another one walking the perimeter. Looks like he circles the building every 15 minutes. Any sign of cameras? Nothing obvious, but Mom, this place is huge. How are we supposed to find Sophie in there? Diane had spent the last 24 hours planning for exactly that question. After receiving the threatening text yesterday, she'd gone home and gathered her small army of invisible people. Janitors from office buildings who knew how to move through secure spaces without being noticed. Security guards who understood patrol patterns and blind spots. Delivery drivers who could get vehicles in and out of areas without raising suspicion. But most importantly, she'd recruited Jerome Washington, a 58-year-old man who'd worked as a commercial electrician for 30 years, before the company downsized and replaced him with younger, cheaper labor. Jerome now cleaned floors at a hospital for half his old salary, but he still knew more about building layouts, electrical systems, and structural mechanics than anyone Diane had ever met. Jerome was currently at the warehouse's southeast corner with 2 others from Diane's crew, preparing to cut power to the building at exactly 11:45 p.m., 3 minutes before Ethan was scheduled to arrive for the exchange. "We don't have to search the whole building," Diane told her son quietly. "We just have to find where they'd logically keep a hostage. Somewhere secure, somewhere they can control access, somewhere far enough from the street that screaming won't be heard. So, probably not ground floor," Marcus Jr. reasoned. "Too many potential entry points. Second or third floor makes more sense." "Good thinking." Diane checked her phone. 11:19 p.m. "Remember the plan. When the lights go out, we have exactly 4 minutes of confusion before their backup generator kicks in. That's our window." 4 minutes isn't very long, Mom." "It's enough." Diane's phone buzzed with a text from Jerome. "In position. Ready when you are," she replied. "Stand by." Another text came in, this one from Ethan. 5 minutes out. "Please tell me you're not actually doing this." Diane typed back, "Trust me. When you get there, act natural. Pretend you're playing by their rules. We'll handle the rest." She pocketed her phone and turned to Marcus Jr. "You know what to do if this goes wrong? Run to the extraction point. Call Detective Holloway. Don't try to be a hero." He recited the instructions she'd drilled into him. "But Mom, you need to know the same thing applies to you." Diane squeezed his shoulder. "I know, baby. I know." At 11:22 p.m., they watched a black SUV pull up to the warehouse's main entrance on Delaware Avenue. 3 men got out, all wearing dark clothing, all moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals. One spoke into a radio, and a moment later, the rolling door at the north entrance began to lift. "That's our confirmation," Diane whispered. "They're gathering for the exchange, which means they're pulling guards from their other positions." She texted Jerome. 15 minutes, get ready." They waited. Diane's heart hammered against her ribs, each minute feeling like an hour. She thought about Sophie, about what the young woman must have endured over the past 3 months. She thought about Ethan's desperation, about Detective Holloway's warning that the hostage would likely be killed regardless. She thought about that dollar tip, about years of being invisible, about finally having a chance to matter. At 11:38 p.m., Ethan's silver BMW pulled into the parking area near the north entrance. He got out slowly, holding a small object in his hand, the USB drive, or at least something that looked like it. He'd actually given Diane the real drive yesterday, and she'd spent the afternoon with Marcus Jr. copying everything to multiple cloud storage accounts with delayed release protocols. The drive in Ethan's hand was a blank decoy. A man emerged from the warehouse, tall, muscular, with a shaved head and a scar running down his left cheek. Even from 50 yards away, Diane could see he was armed. He said something to Ethan that she couldn't hear, then gestured for him to come inside. Ethan hesitated, then followed. "That's our cue," Diane said. She texted Jerome. "Now." 30 seconds later, every light in the warehouse went out. The darkness was sudden, complete. Inside the building, she could hear raised voices, confusion, someone shouting orders. "Move," Diane commanded. She and Marcus Jr. sprinted from their hiding spot toward a side entrance they'd identified during last night's reconnaissance. The door was locked, but Diane had prepared for that. She pulled out a pry bar from her backpack and wedged it into the door frame. The wood was old, rotted. It took 3 hard pulls, but the door gave way with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. They slipped inside. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of shadows and obstacles. Diane pulled out a small flashlight, keeping the beam low, and pointed at the ground. They moved quickly but carefully, weaving between pallets of abandoned equipment and old machinery that hadn't run in decades. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead, the guards trying to figure out what had caused the blackout. Diane and Marcus Jr. pressed themselves against a concrete support pillar as 2 men rushed past, heading toward the electrical room. "Second floor," Diane whispered. "Let's go." They found a metal staircase and climbed, each step causing a faint creak that made Diane's heart skip. The second floor was more open, what had once been an office area, now gutted and empty except for some filing cabinets and broken furniture. And there, in the far corner, a door with a padlock. "Mom?" Marcus Jr. pointed. They approached cautiously. The padlock was new, industrial strength, not something that could be pried open easily. But Diane had prepared for this too. She pulled out a small set of bolt cutters from her backpack. Jerome had insisted she take them. The cutters bit into the padlock's shackle. It took all of Diane's strength, but finally the lock gave way with a snap. She pulled the door open. Inside was a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a single window that had been covered with plywood. A camping lantern sat on the floor, providing dim battery-powered light, and tied to a metal chair in the center of the room was Sophie Volkov. The young woman looked up, her eyes widening in shock and terror. She was thin, so much thinner than in the video. Her blonde hair was matted, her face bruised. Duct tape covered her mouth. "Sophie," Diane whispered, rushing forward. "We're here to get you out." Sophie made muffled sounds behind the tape, her eyes darting between Diane and Marcus Jr., clearly confused about who they were and whether this was real. Diane gently peeled the tape from Sophie's mouth. "I'm a friend of Ethan's. We don't have much time." "Ethan?" Sophie gasped, her voice hoarse. "Where is he? He's downstairs, creating a distraction so we could get to you." Diane pulled out a pocket knife and began cutting through the zip ties binding Sophie's wrists and ankles. "Can you walk?" "I think so. I haven't stood up in, I don't even know how long." Marcus Jr. kept watch at the door. "Mom, I hear people coming up the stairs." "Help me," Diane said urgently. Together they got Sophie to her feet. She swayed, her legs weak from captivity, but she managed to stand. Diane put Sophie's arm over her shoulder, supporting her weight. "There's an emergency exit on the west side of this floor," Diane said. "Jerome scouted it last night, leads to an external fire escape." They made it perhaps 20 feet before a voice called out behind them. "That's far enough." Diane turned to see the scarred man from earlier, along with 2 others. All 3 had guns drawn, pointed directly at them. Behind them, being pushed forward roughly, was Ethan. "I had a feeling something wasn't right," the scarred man said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. The power outage was too convenient, and Ethan here kept stalling, asking questions, trying to drag things out. Made me suspicious, so I sent some boys to check on our guest. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Imagine my surprise. "Let them go," Ethan said desperately. "You have me. You have the USB drive, just let them—" "The USB drive is blank," the man interrupted. "We checked. Did you really think we wouldn't verify it before completing the exchange?" He shook his head. "You broke the rules, Ethan, and now everyone pays the price." Diane's mind raced. They were trapped. 3 armed men between them and the exit. No weapons, no backup. She'd gambled everything on speed and surprise, and they'd been caught. But then she heard it, the distant wail of sirens. The scarred man heard it too. His expression changed, confusion replacing confidence. "What the hell?" "That would be the Philadelphia Police Department," said a voice from the stairs behind him. "And the FBI. And if I'm not mistaken, probably some U.S. Marshals thrown in for good measure." Detective James Holloway stepped into view, his service weapon drawn. Behind him were at least a dozen officers in tactical gear, their rifles trained on the 3 gunmen. "Drop your weapons," Holloway commanded. "Now." For a moment, Diane thought they might actually start shooting. The scarred man's finger twitched on his trigger, but then the reality of the situation sank in. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. One by one, the guns clattered to the floor. Hands on your heads, on your knees, you know the drill. Officers swarmed forward, securing the suspects. Holloway walked past them toward Diane, Sophie, Marcus Jr., and Ethan. His expression was unreadable. "Detective?" Diane said, her voice shaking from adrenaline. "How did you—" "Your son called me 45 minutes ago," Holloway said. "Told me everything. The kidnapping, the corruption, the exchange tonight. Gave me copies of all the evidence you'd gathered." He looked at Marcus Jr. Smart kid. Knew when to call for backup. Diane turned to her son, who had the decency to look slightly sheepish. "Mom, you told me to call Detective Holloway if things went wrong." "Well, I figured breaking into a criminal warehouse definitely qualified." Despite everything, the terror, the danger, the absolute insanity of the last few minutes, Diane laughed. It was a slightly hysterical sound, but genuine. "Medical," Holloway called out. "We need medical up here." Paramedics rushed in, taking Sophie from Diane and guiding her toward a stretcher. Ethan followed them, holding his sister's hand, tears streaming down his face. "You're alive," he kept saying. "You're alive. I knew you'd find me," Sophie whispered. "I knew you wouldn't give up." As they were escorted out, Holloway turned to Diane. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen someone do. I haven't decided which. Can it be both?" Diane asked weakly. Yeah, Holloway said, a slight smile crossing his face. I suppose it can. He gestured toward the stairs. Come on, we need to get your statements, and then there's someone you should meet. They descended to the ground floor where the warehouse was now flooded with police and federal agents. Crime scene techs were already setting up, photographing everything, collecting evidence. Near the north entrance, Diane saw a man in handcuffs being read his Miranda rights. He wore an expensive suit, had perfectly styled gray hair, and the kind of face that appeared on campaign posters. Richard Marsh. How? Diane asked Holloway. How is he here? Because once your son gave me the evidence, once I had proof of the money laundering operation, I could finally move on Marsh without being shut down by his friends in high places. Holloway's voice carried deep satisfaction. We've been tracking his communications for the past 6 hours. When he made the call to his crew here at the warehouse confirming the exchange was happening, we had everything we needed to connect him directly to Sophie's kidnapping. Marsh's eyes swept across the warehouse, landing on Diane. For just a moment, their gazes locked. She was a cleaning lady from a restaurant, a woman he would never have noticed in 1,000 lifetimes. And yet, she was the one who had brought him down. He looked away first. The evidence you gathered, Holloway continued, combined with Sophie's research and the financial records on that USB drive, it's enough to put Marsh away for the rest of his life. Money laundering, kidnapping, conspiracy, corruption. The DA is already preparing indictments for at least 15 people connected to this operation. 15? Ethan had rejoined them, leaving Sophie with the paramedics. How many people were involved? Marsh didn't do this alone. He had help from inside the police department, the mayor's office, the city council. We're talking about a corruption network that goes deep. But thanks to you, he looked at Diane, we finally have enough evidence to burn it all down. Over the next 2 hours, Diane gave her statement to at least 4 different investigators. She told them everything, about the restaurant, about the USB drive, about the city archives, about the planning and the rescue. Marcus Jr. sat beside her the whole time, also giving his statement, describing his role in distributing the evidence files. It was nearly 3 a.m. when they were finally cleared to leave. Jerome and the others from Diane's crew had already been interviewed and released. Outside the warehouse, the December night had turned colder, snow beginning to fall in light flurries. Ethan waited by his car. When he saw Diane, he walked over quickly. Sophie's at Hahnemann Hospital, he said. They're checking her over, but the doctors say she'll be okay. Physically, at least. The psychological recovery. He trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. She wants to meet you. The person who saved her life. I didn't do it alone, Diane said, pulling Marcus Jr. close. And honestly, I think your sister saved herself. 3 months held captive and she never gave up. Never told them what they wanted to know. That's strength. Still, Ethan said, she wouldn't be alive without you. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and showed it to Diane. It was a banking app, showing a completed transfer. $120,000. I always keep my promises. Diane stared at the number. It was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. More than she'd earned in 5 years at Mercer's. That's not why I did this, she said quietly. I know, Ethan replied. But you earned it anyway. You risked your life, involved your son, took on people who would have killed you without hesitation. That deserves more than gratitude. Diane looked down at her phone, at the confirmation of the transfer. She thought about her leaky ceiling, about her mother's medication, about Marcus Jr.'s education. She thought about all the years of scraping by, of making every dollar stretch, of being invisible and undervalued. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan pulled her into a hug. No, thank you. Detective Holloway approached as they separated. Diane, before you go, the DA wants you to testify at Marsh's trial. With your evidence and testimony, combined with Sophie's research, this case is airtight, but it means you'll be in the public eye. The media will want to talk to you. Your life is going to change. Diane thought about that, about being invisible no longer, about being seen, recognized, valued. I can handle it, she said. I believe you can. Holloway handed her a new business card. If you ever decide you want to do more than clean restaurants, give me a call. The police department could use someone with your investigative skills and your ability to see what others miss. Diane took the card, smiling. I'll think about it. As Holloway walked away, Marcus Jr. tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mom, can we go home now? I have school tomorrow. School? Diane laughed. ruffling his hair. "Baby, after tonight you can take tomorrow off. I think you've earned it." They walked toward the subway station, mother and son, through the falling snow. Behind them, the warehouse was still lit up with police lights. Investigators still processing the scene where a corrupt city councilman's empire had finally fallen. Diane thought about Monday night, just 4 days ago, though it felt like a lifetime. She thought about that dollar tip, about the humiliation and anger it had sparked, about looking under that table and finding something that had changed everything. She thought about Sophie, tied to that chair in the video, terrified but defiant. She thought about Ethan's desperation, about Detective Holloway's cynicism turned to respect, about Jerome and the others who had helped because they too were tired of being invisible. And she thought about herself, Diane Carter, 43 years old, cleaning lady at Mercer's Bistro, the woman nobody noticed. The woman who had somehow brought down one of the most powerful men in Philadelphia. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She opened it, her heart rate spiking for a moment before she realized it wasn't a threat. It was from Sophie. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did, for risking everything to save me. My brother says you did it because you were tired of being invisible. I understand that. After 3 months of being held captive, being treated like I didn't matter, like my life was disposable. I understand that more than you know. You gave me my life back, and you showed me that the most dangerous person to powerful men isn't someone with a badge or a title. It's someone they never bothered to see. Thank you, Diane, for seeing me, for fighting for me, for being the hero I needed. I hope someday I can be half as brave as you." Diane read the message twice, tears blurring her vision. She typed back, "You already are. Get some rest. We'll talk soon." As they descended into the subway station, Marcus Jr. spoke quietly. "Mom, what you did tonight, that was pretty amazing." Diane looked at her son, at his earnest face, at the pride shining in his eyes. "We did it together, baby. You were just as brave as I was. But you started it. You decided to help a stranger even though it was dangerous, even though you could have just walked away. Why?" Diane thought about the question, about years of being dismissed, undervalued, treated as if she didn't matter, about finally having a chance to prove to herself more than anyone that she did. "Because someone had to," she said simply. "And for once in my life, I decided that someone could be me." The train pulled into the station. They boarded, finding seats near the back. The car was nearly empty at this hour, just a few night shift workers heading home, too tired to notice the woman and her son who had just saved a life and brought down a criminal empire. Invisible again. But this time, Diane didn't mind, because she knew the truth now. Being invisible wasn't weakness. It was power. The power to see what others missed. The power to move through spaces without drawing attention. The power to strike when least expected. The coins from that dollar tip were still in her coat pocket. She pulled them out, looked at them in the dim light of the subway car. $1. The tip that had insulted her. The tip that had sparked her anger. The tip that had, in a strange way, changed her entire life. She smiled and dropped the coins into a homeless man's cup as she walked past. He looked up, surprised, and she saw herself in his eyes. Another invisible person, trying to survive in a world that had trained itself not to see. "Have a better night," she said softly. As the train carried them through the dark tunnels beneath Philadelphia, Diane leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would wake up and return to her life, return to Mercer's Bistro, to cleaning tables and collecting tips. But she wouldn't be the same person, because Diane Carter had looked under the table, and she'd found her courage. 6 months later, Diane stood before the Philadelphia City Council chambers, no longer invisible. The trial had made headlines. Marsh was serving 20 years. Sophie had returned to her studies, stronger than before, and Ethan had become more than a client. He'd become a friend. But the biggest change was Diane herself. She'd left Mercer's Bistro and now worked with Detective Holloway's public corruption unit, using her unique perspective to investigate cases others overlooked. "Ready?" Marcus Jr. asked, adjusting his new suit. "Always." Diane smiled. They walked inside together, seen, valued, and finally visible. And finally,